This is Economics, Chapter 2, Economic Systems, Video Segment 1. While you're going through this, you should already have notes for each section that you have read in your note packet. You should add to those notes anything that I say here that is of importance, summarizing all the key points. You're also going to, every time you see a word with 3 dots, it's a vocab term, also identified as vocab term. You either write down the definition in your notes or on a separate sheet of paper. If I ask a question during lecture or if there's a question on the slide, you need to answer that in your notes as well. So let's get started. Section 1, answering the 3 economic questions. Your first vocab term is economic system. 3 economic questions. The first one is what goods and services should be produced? How should these goods and services be produced? And the third is who consumes these goods and services? Depending on how a government or country answers these questions will tell you what type of economic system that country has, whether it be free market, command economy, so on and so forth. The 3 questions. So the first ones, when you look at what goods and services should be produced, when a government looks at that from its standpoint, basically it has to do with that government's budget. So how much do they spend on defense, education, public health, welfare? Every government only has a finite amount of money to spend, so it has to be wise in how it spends that money. And each country evaluates how much to spend on each category based on its own needs. Question 2, how is it going to be produced? We'll look at electricity for our example there. So people today consume large amounts of electricity. It's needed for our modern way of life. So how do we generate electricity? Does it come from oil being distilled into gasoline and then being fueled that way? Solar energy, nuclear energy. So how are we going to produce the amount of energy that we need? Another example, teachers in the classroom. Are they going to have 20 students? Are they going to have 50? When your school district looks at how many teachers it can have and what their salary is going to be, that's how it weighs out how many students will be in each class. Not to mention you have to take into account what's best for the student and what's best for the teacher. If I'm teaching 20 students, that's a fairly decent class size, which would allow for good activities, ease of grading, and so on and so forth. If you change that to 50, things will be a little bit different. It's going to take longer for me to grade papers, give you feedback. It's more difficult to manage the class and control it. So there are lots of factors that go into how many students per teacher. Same thing we'll go with for farms. What's going to be the best for how to produce farm goods? Several small family farms or large corporate farms. Both have their advantages and disadvantages. You have small family farms, you have more people working, which is good for the economy. However, because small families don't have access to large amounts of money very easily, they oftentimes don't have the most efficient or up-to-date technologies for farming like a large corporation would. So each one has its advantages and disadvantages. If you'd like to, at this point, you can look at Figure 2.1 in your book. That gives you a visual representation of that. Number 3, who drives a sports car, who doesn't? So in America, anyone can buy a sports car if they have the money to. There are no regulations saying only certain people or certain classes of people can drive a sports car. The only thing that determines who can have a sports car is who has the money for a sports car. In other countries, it's not the same. Not really with sports cars, but with other goods. Certain goods are only allowed for certain areas of that country's government. For instance, in communist Russia, before the 1990s, the best materials were given to the military and the space program. That's materials for uniforms, for weapons, for building machines, for vehicles, things like that. So there wasn't much available to the population at large when it came to these consumer goods. So that would be an example. Your next vocabulary word is factor payments. Economic goals and societal values. Right now I want you to look at Figure 2.2 in your book, and then we'll continue on. Economic efficiency. Economic efficiency is what to produce and how to produce it. Something is efficient if you do things with as little effort as possible, but get the most out of it. Um, Economic freedoms. We talked about that. Your next vocabulary term is patriotism. Um, Patriotism, yes, is love for one's country. It's more than that here, so make sure you get a good definition there. In America, anyone can be an entrepreneur. There are no laws saying that only certain types of people, certain races of people, can own, start, begin a business. Anyone can. Does that mean that everyone will? No. Most people who start a business oftentimes fail at that business, at least on the first attempt. So it is difficult. But so there are things that prevent people from becoming an entrepreneur or becoming a successful entrepreneur, but there are no laws saying who can or cannot be an entrepreneur. Economic security and predictability. Here in America, or in the school district, I get my paycheck on time. If I don't, it means there's a problem in payroll. It means that most likely someone will at least get a suspension, if not get fired from their job. When you go to a grocery store or any other type of store, you expect there to be goods there at the store. If you went to Walmart and they were out of something, you're not going to shop at Walmart. You'll go to Jewel or another store that does have your item in stock. And that's some of the things that we talked about with security and predictability. Other countries, it's not the same. When you looked at communist Russia from 1990 and before, people would get a voucher for whatever food items, grocery items that they were going to have, and they'd have to wait in long lines at a store for a limited quantity of goods that they might not get, even though they had a voucher saying, this store owes me one glass of milk. If they have no milk, then you don't get any, even if you have a voucher for it. So it's a little bit different. Safety net is your next vocabulary term. Economic equality. This is everyone getting their fair share. When you look at a nurse's pay and a lawyer's pay, so a nurse makes less than a lawyer. Lawyers make a lot of money. The reason lawyers make a lot of money is because the amount of time and money they've invested in their own education to get to that point. They've gone to grade school, high school, college, and then they've gone, after that, they've gone to law school, and now they're working at a law firm. And all of that costs a large amount of money, takes a lot of studying, so on and so forth. So because of that, they can charge those high fees to help compensate them for that. Nurses also have to go to college to get a degree, which is why they make more than non-college grads. But when you look at things in terms of society, a nurse is more important than a lawyer. If we don't have any lawyers, we could probably still function as a society. If we don't have nurses, though, you have a lot more people getting sick, dying, so on and so forth. So a nurse's job may be more important, but they don't make as much for the reasons that we've discussed already. Economic growth and innovation. Your next vocabulary term is standard of living. You increase the standard of living when you increase the population, or at least that's the new theory. So as more people are born, you need to increase that standard of living. It goes back to the American dream, that each generation will improve the quality of life for the following generation. So your parents have made it their job to make sure that when you grow up, that you will have things better than they did. That's kind of how things go in America. How do we do that? Two things: new jobs and new innovations and technologies. So new jobs means that there'll be jobs for people your age and younger when you mature and you become 18 or older, when you're done with school, that you'll be able to find a job and you'll be able to support yourself and your family with it. And how do you get these new jobs? With new technological innovations to produce goods and services. Additional goals. Some other goals of government or country might be environmental protection or universal medical care. Two things that we have seen recently in America. We've seen a lot more regulations on companies, and we've seen an initiative for people to go green, to be more energy efficient and recycle more. And then, as we've seen lately, universal medical care with Obamacare has been hotly debated in our society. So let's talk about economy and values next. Your first vocab term is going to be a traditional economy. This is your first economic system. In a traditional economy, there's little room for change. Most of the time, there are gender roles. So if you want to go back to the old days, Men would go out and hunt, women would stay in, take care of the kids, manage the household, maybe go gather vegetables, take care of a garden, things like that. Traditional economies are oftentimes small, close communities, and they're usually agriculture and hunter based. So they receive a lot of their food stocks from either growing them themselves or hunting them. And most oftentimes in traditional economies, law and religious beliefs are mixed together. Um, what you might know of as a theocracy, but not exactly the same, where religion and normal doctrine are the same, one and the same. These would be similar, but there might be some distinct differences. Some drawbacks to traditional economies: hard pressed to adjust. They're very stagnant. They don't allow for economic growth. They don't have constant new technologies and ideas. It basically follows the status quo. Um, my dad was a hunter. I'm a hunter. I'm always going to hunt. I'm not going to come up with some new way to make a net or a fish or whatever the case may be. Everything remains the same. They follow the same traditions. Traditionally speaking, these economies also have a lack of access to goods. Most of the time they're very remote. They're not near cities, so they don't get goods and services that other people might get. Along with that, you have a lack of modern conveniences. They might not have electricity. If they do, it might be intermittent. They're not most likely going to have very many cars, things like that. And this also equates to a lower standard of living. The next one we're going to talk about are market economies, and it's also a vocab term. These are what we know as free markets or capitalism. We have a almost free market economy here in the United States. It does have some government intervention and regulation, so it's not a true market economy, but it is close. And what that means is that individuals and businesses answer the three economic questions for themselves. The government doesn't tell them what to do. And that often is referred to as capitalism as well. Command economies, the next vocab term, will be a centrally planned economy. This is where the government makes all economic choices. The government says, you're going to open a steel mill, we're going to give you this much iron ore, we're going to give you this many employees, and you're going to have this output. So for every single business, every single good and service that's produced, the government decides who, what, where, when, and how for it. It's a very difficult task for a government, and oftentimes means they need a large bureaucracy, which is another word for agency, to oversee all that. They need several people to manage and supervise all of these things. In a free market economy, you don't need that. Individuals do that on their own. So you see the big difference there. And the next one is a mixed economy. That's where it's a blend between a market and a command, and this can vary from being almost the market economy to almost the command economy. It's somewhere in between that spectrum. And most economies today will fit somewhere in between there.